Hey guys, Charles Hall. Today I have Jennifer O'Neill with me, and we're going to be talking about monitoring. Doesn't that sound fantastic? But we're going to be talking about monitoring as it relates to what we used to call quality control. Now it's called quality management. As you know, there's some new standards coming, and you'll need to be up to speed on what we're talking about today. So, Jennifer, I'm just going to start out with a real basic question. What is monitoring and remediation, and how does this fit into these QM standards?
Yeah, so the monitoring and remediation it's a process, but it's one of the 8 components that's outlined in the standard. And it really is the way that I look at monitoring is really the system of quality management as a whole. So it's really the basis for continuing improvement. So monitoring is intended to look at what you're doing, understand with whether what you are doing is meeting the objectives of your quality management system, that your policies and procedures are working appropriately, and then it assists you in forming that conclusion for your annual evaluation of your quality management system.
Okay, and we're going to talk about EQRs in a minute, the engagement quality reviews, and how those fit into this equation of monitoring and reviewing. Now, Jennifer, I'm hearing you talk about monitoring as though it's an ongoing, almost daily thing, I guess, for some firms and maybe not for others. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it can be. But I think it gets down to what are your policies and procedures and what are your underlying quality risks. So, your quality risks drive your policies and procedures, and then the monitoring ensures those policies and procedures are appropriate. So, you could have ongoing monitoring activities that are actually built into the firm processes. An example of that could be like a transmittal sheet being reviewed to make sure that the engagement partner has signed off. Something that's built into the processes. Could be some type of an electronic flag that goes off. I think most firms, though, are going to see more of this periodic monitoring activities, which are done in some type of an interval basis, monthly, quarterly, annually. Some firms, for if the policies and procedures around lower risk, they may not even want to do it annually. They may want to do it every 2 or 3 years. The standard doesn't really specify the
Yeah.
frequency of the monitoring activities, which is both interesting and challenging, we're finding.
Yeah, and that's really different for us. I know you're from Canada and you've done a lot of work in Canada. So, but for here in the U.S., we've done inspections. So we'd have a 3 year peer review cycle. Year three, you might do a peer review. Years one and two, we would do internal inspections, and most firms would do these all at one time, maybe a particular month in the year. But what I'm hearing you say is that this standard opens up a monitoring process that might go to a 2, 3, or even 4 year cycle rather than an annual cycle.
Yeah, and I think there's a couple different monitoring activities included, and I think in all of that because you have your completed file inspections, which are cyclical, and the standard suggests once one engagement file per partner every 3 years is kind of a base, but it is risk based, so that might be your policy as a starting point, but you need to review that every year to see if it makes sense. But then there's other monitoring activities over other policies and procedures that may not be even inspection. Yeah, you wouldn't inspect an engagement file. It could be something. It could be something different, like looking at personnel files or interviewing the staff. So it really is risk based. The entire standard is risk based. So when
Right.
we're thinking about what kind of monitoring to put into place, what kind of and the frequency and the timing of it, we have to look at the underlying risk and say, well,
Right.
if it's a higher risk, then I probably want to review that on a more frequent basis.
So the standard really doesn't tell us exactly what to do. Now, I am aware that the completed files, there needs to be a completed file inspection. Is that right? But
Yeah. So there's this inspection of completed files that needs to be done on a cyclical basis. So they don't tell you what the cycle is. The standard says, they suggest an engagement file per partner, every 3 years as a starting point, but it's very much a risk-based approach. So we would
Okay.
want to look to say, if there's more complex issues, something's happened during the year, there's been other inspection findings or the monitoring activities have suggested that there's further issues, then 3 years may be too long. So you might want to increase that. And that could be on an engagement partner by engagement partner. It doesn't have to be firm wide.
Yeah, so let's say a firm has 40 partners and it has one black sheep that constantly doesn't do what they should do. I guess this standard would maybe call for us to consider that quality risk, and we might look at that partner every year until things get cleaned up.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. But you're also saying that completed file inspection. Say there's an engagement partner and they only do compilations. They're going to get a look at some time in that 2 3 year cycle.
Yeah. And again, it's up to the firm to decide what is appropriate in the circumstances. Like we have some firms who just do compilation engagements. And I think our standard suggests it potentially up to 5 year cycle. I think 5 years is way too long because if you leave
Yeah,
something
yeah,
undetected for 5 years, it's a long time to go. Personally, I don't think anything more than 3 years is appropriate, and I think in a lot of firms that have complex issues, that may be too long as well. But it's up to the firm. This standard does not specify what that cycle is, just that
okay.
the firm needs to have a policy around when and how those completed file inspections are going to be done.
Yeah, so the completed file inspections required, but the ongoing monitoring is optional. Is that correct?
Exactly. So completed file inspections are a periodic monitoring activity that's required.
Yeah,
Any other periodic monitoring or ongoing monitoring, again, is up to the firm to determine what is appropriate in the circumstances, and how often to do that. So if you had like a policy around obtaining engagement letters before every year before the beginning of an engagement, what you could do for a monitoring activity, maybe once a year you take a sample of files and you say, hey, did the engagement partners
yeah,
get that engagement letter before the commencement of the start date of the audit? So that's not looking at the entire file. It's not doing a
right.
completed file inspection. I'm not doing a full review, but I'm looking for a particular evidence that a particular policy or procedure was followed. It's kind
Yeah,
of like testing controls in an audit. So we have to just
right.
figure out what are the key controls that the firm has in place. Those that are more important, we want to make sure that we look at them more frequently.
Yeah.
And maybe some of the other ones we don't even need to monitor because maybe they're not that key. They just, they're there because of maybe a low risk in the firm and they decide that it's not as important to test.
So we're designing the monitoring based on what our particular risks are. So let's talk a moment about engagement quality reviews. We used to call these EQCRs. Now we call them EQRs. So in EQR, first tell us, do we have to do this? And then, yeah, if we have to do this, how do we go about designing the threshold for what is subject to an EQR? Because as I understand it, if say we say all banks are subject to EQR, then every one of those banks has to be inspected at the end of the engagement. So how do we know what criteria to apply in developing that policy that's going to be so important?
Yeah, and this is one that's on a firm by firm basis. Now, the Canadian standard and the US standard differ slightly. We are required to do EQRs over all listed entities. And then, other than that, it's high risk. The US standard just says basically that if they're listed entity, they're considered high risk anyways. So if it's a high risk type of engagement, then yes, you would want to do this pre issuance engagement level review on that file. coming up with the criteria is really important, and it's a matter of whatever the risk profile is for the firm. Where are they comfortable? Where do they feel that they need to be have somebody external involved so that they can, the EQR is more of a not necessarily a file review as much as it is a challenge in terms of
Yeah.
some of the significant judgments that were made. So it's more of a preventative measure. Um,
Yeah, so
for those
say a
high risk engagements.
firm says all single audits would be subject to EQR. And by the way, we're not saying your firm should do that, just an example. But let's say that's in place. Let's say I'm the engagement partner, I do the single audit, I'm done. And let's say you're the EQR person. What happens at that point?
So if the criteria get triggered,
Yeah,
then that's when there's a whole new standard now on engagement quality reviews in terms of how to appoint an engagement quality reviewer, what their competence and capabilities and authority is to be, and then what they need to do during the engagement. If they employ assistants, it's a pretty big standard
yeah,
now where it used to all
yeah,
kind of be included. But it really is a risk-based, again, it's a risk-based approach. Where are the risks? Do you bring an EQR in at the beginning, or do you wait till the end? I think the important thing is objectivity, that the engagement quality reviewer is not performing the work. They are challenging what was there. So I don't think there's anything wrong in bringing that person along through the engagement. Um, all of the queries from the EQR has to be cleared before you can date your report. So I think, like, if you bring somebody in after the risk assessment procedures, that gives them the opportunity to say, hey, I think you missed the boat on identifying this risk, or your risk assessment is completely off here, this doesn't make sense. That allows you to course correct before you get to the very end of the engagement, want to issue the report, and you can't because EQR won't sign off. So it's kind of an intermittent. I would almost say there's nothing wrong with doing it at the end. I just
yeah.
think that you might miss some opportunities for efficiencies.
Yeah, so I've been a QC partner for many years, and I've looked at thousands of reports and files, and oftentimes I'm getting a request for a review the day before it needs to be issued. So the engagement's on fire, and they're like, we got to have this, and I review it. And then if I see something that isn't where it should be, it's a really uncomfortable place to be. So if we do an EQR, say one, maybe we stage this, we do a part in the beginning, and as you said, we're not making any decisions, and
Mm-hmm.
we're not doing the work. We're simply reviewing their planning in step one, and we're blessing it and signing off on it. Then maybe in the middle, we take another look, we sign off on some more, and then at the end, the same thing. I like that rather than, okay, here's the last day, we got 6 hours, and it's not a good place to be.
Well, one of the interesting requirements that I thought they put in the standard is that there needs to be sufficient time for the EQR person to be
Right,
able to
yes,
perform their role.
yep,
And it's very clearly spelt out now. So there
yep,
needs to be that sufficient time. So that's what I think bringing somebody in from the beginning, it just makes the process go smoother. As long as that person can remain objective and not get too involved in the file in terms of making the decisions. But if they've completely missed a risk and they haven't done appropriate audit work, and you've got 6 hours to issue the report, there's no way that's going to happen. It's not going to work. Where if you identify that, hey, there's a big risk here that you guys are missing, then that allows them to course correct and say, yes, okay, here's my new risk assessment, this is what I'm going to do about it. So when they go actually perform the work, they're doing the right procedure. So I think it just helps all the way along, personally.
yeah. So, and running a little short on time. Jennifer and I could talk about this for days, but we'll limit what we're doing. But let's talk about objectivity for a moment, and then we'll put a bow on things. So here in the U.S., you can self-inspect, you can self-review. And so if you got a one-person firm and you do the work, there's certain safeguards in the standard where you can maybe use a peer review checklist to review that file later on. There's certain things you can do to make it okay. Um, so, but generally in a perfect world, I know in Canada they don't even allow this where, self-inspections not allowed, if I'm understanding that right, if you'll speak to that.
Yeah, I think we have the same issue when it comes to monitoring activities that are not the completed file inspections. So they treat the completed file inspections differently. You cannot be in Canada, you cannot be part of the engagement team, you cannot be the engagement quality reviewer. I think the same objectivity issues we are struggling with on the other monitoring activities. Can a firm do their own monitoring? Do they need to bring somebody external in? Can they be objective? And I think, objectivity, when you think about it, is am I bringing a bias in that I'm not going to find what I did wrong? I'm not going to be open to finding what I did wrong. So, that's where we do have checklists that we would use for monitoring as well, and identifying things that go wrong can show that you are that you're being objective.
Right, right.
Not saying, oh, that's just a one-off problem and it's really not an issue. That doesn't
Right.
really show objectivity. So I we have the objectivity and the self-review threat on our regular monitoring activities, but we're prohibited from doing our own completed file inspection. It can be done within the same firm. If there's multiple partners, they could like swap files. So they don't have to go external to the firm, but they can't be on the engagement team.
Yeah, so here in the U.S., the real small firms may want to consider reaching out to a third party, somebody like me. I've got plenty of work. You can call me or not call me. So I'm not doing this as an advertisement. But if you're really small, you may want to look for somebody like Jennifer or myself to say, hey, can you do, a certain part of the monitoring or EQR or whatever when it's done. So what we've said so far is, in summary, is we've got a monitoring process that's risk-based. Then we've also got an engagement quality review process. That's risk-based too, because the criteria we're looking at is we're touchy-feely. There's some subjectivity here in determining what's going to be subject to EQR. And then we want to be objective as we do all of this. But again, in the U.S., you can self-review. So any closing thoughts here?
Yeah, I think the monitoring and remediation process is over the quality management system as a whole. So I think, it's no longer just completed file inspections. We spent a lot of time just really focusing on completed file inspections, but it really is making sure that you are monitoring that if there's any changes to your firm, that the risks get picked up, that the policies and procedures are appropriate, that your monitoring process is appropriate. And it really is over that system, the entire system as a whole.
Yes. And last thing I'll say is Jennifer has some software. You wanted to give us a brief summary of how that works?
Oh, perfect. So Tilaus, which is Tilaus.io is the website. We offer a cloud-based platform that walks you through designing and implementing your quality management system, and then designing the monitoring and performing the annual evaluation. So it's kind of a one-stop place that kind of walks you through and manages the entire system. We have some default quality risks that you can either use or create your own, and then create corresponding policies and corresponding monitoring activities within the same platform.
Very good, very good. Well, thank you for sharing your knowledge today. As I said in the last interview, I think Jennifer probably knows as much about this as anybody in the world. So glad to have her on. Having somebody like her on my videos makes me look better, so I appreciate her coming on and upping my grade a little bit. So that's good. All right, well, thank you guys for being with us today, and until next time, take care. Bye now.